Three, two. Hello and welcome everyone to another amazing and wonderful interview that we have with some amazing developers. I'm particularly excited about this game because I played this game long ago and far away. Since this is a bit of a traveling game, and honestly, it was amazing back then, and it is still amazing now. I am talking about Glitchhikers, The Space Between, by Silver String Media, published by Fellow Traveler, who also do amazing stuff. And I am blessed to be here with Clarice and Lucas. Thank you both for being here. Obviously, if anyone is seen the trailer or has played the game, uh, Glitchhiker is sort of a traveling tale. It is people coming in and out of your life with stories, bits and pieces as you're going through. Uh, we'll start with Lucas. What is sort of the highlight, or what are some of the things about the game that calls to you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and thanks for having us to talk about it. This is awesome. Glitchhikers really is. It's a game about the journey, not the destination, right? It's about the late night liminal space. If you've ever been in, an airport terminal in the middle of the night, waiting for your flight, or driving alone on a highway. Or just wandering around, a park late at night, as maybe we did in college, where your mind is just wandering. You're thinking about life and the universe and love and death and all of these things that you think about in those moments, with thoughts sort of careening off of each other in weird and interesting ways. That's really the core of the Glitchhikers experience, and something that was always really fun and interesting for us to explore in the writing and the characters you meet. It's always this interesting combination of these big ideas and really intimate personal stories, and how do these things affect you or affect these characters that you're talking about. And ultimately, in the game, we sort of set up this scenario where you're traveling and you're talking to people, but you're not like playing a character necessarily. There's no goal, right? Glitchhikers is all about just how you, as the player, being in this space, or in this space between spaces, as it were, and having a bit of just an experience of your own in this journey, whichever sort of journey that you take. And we've always said something that is really fun to play with in designing a game that I don't know that a lot of games do, is we don't, as the developers, really care what your experience is of the game, as long as you have an experience with the game. Everyone comes at it from someplace different, and gets something different out of it. And all of those things are very successful to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I was gonna say there's a lot of stories. As you, as the Claris, as the creative director, uh, how do you manage to like create so many different interweaving conversations, stories? How do you create something that is personal but still, you know, uh, intriguing? There's such a great line that you walk with this game, that it feels like these conversations can sometimes feel like they come out of nowhere, but they also feel like they talk to you in such a very personal way. And a lot of people pull out their own sort of details in the ways that they talk about it, which we'll mention a little bit later. But for you, of course, please talk.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. First of all, credit where it's due. Like Lucas did by far the bulk of the writing. I helped outline it and do a lot of editing. But you know, credit always to the writer. Like so much of that is the magic of writing. But really, with Glitchhikers: The Spaces Between, we were trying to, as much as we wanted to tell stories and some specifically queer stories that we'll get to a little bit later on in our conversation, we also wanted to hold space for the player. That's a phrase I've been using a lot during the kind of development of this as creative director, is thinking of the stories, the music, and the environments, whether you choose the highway journey, the late night walk in a park, whether you're on the like folksy commuter train, or whether you're bouncing and literally flying around this trippy synthesizer turned airport terminal late at night. Like, it's about how these common experiences, common refrains that touch deep threads of the human experience intermingle with the kind of mundane, just vernacular architecture that we pass through all the time without thinking, mixed with quasi-incomplete, discordant, morphing music that, kind of leans in the more ambient or mindfulness side of things, and then interjecting, whether that's through the characters you're meeting or whether the kind of VO segments that we have in the different journeys, like these either provocations, like oftentimes the VO has this uncanny quality of speaking directly to you, even though they're always functioning within this kind of more general anonymous perspective. Like there's the podcast host who's ostensibly talking to thousands of people. There's the train conductor who's speaking to everyone on the train. But also, the train conductor is only speaking to you because this entire world of Glitchhikers exists just for you and how you fill the space and what parts of the stories grab you and how your life experience and you, the player, shape and really add and transform the meaning from just an assemblage of different refrains into a more cohesive narrative that hopefully gives either, pleasure, entertainment, clarity. We, again, to bring it back to this idea of holding space for the player, we really wanted to give people options and how they wanted to engage with it, give people abilities to gracefully exit conversations, but also have there just be a lot of randomness. You don't know necessarily what hikers are going to show up on a particular journey. You can, as you get to know the different journeys, pick one over the others to kind of have a more folksy community vibe on the train, or a more kind of anonymous, like endless highway. We've got one of Lucas's cats saying hello.
Always.
But yeah, I think that it's both about giving players a lot of agency and choice. These spaces have a lot of implied power behind them. I mean, the ability to fly across the planet on an airplane is pretty amazing. It's not something that most of the humans who've ever lived or died on planet Earth have access to. The ability to be in a car, to be the master of your own space, but also to take that space with you. The ability to have access to public transport. Public transportation that's well funded, I'd like to say, is also a wonderful power. And public parks are also an amazing public commodity. I think that these are amazing spaces that are about now I know I'm rambling here.
No. I think
but are about holding space for the player, and I know I've already said that a bunch.
But I think you hit on a really good point, where it is these spaces that you hold on to is these stories as they're coming in. It's almost like a Rorschach test, where you get to pick. You see the stories, you see the elements that are coming at you, and you take the bits and pieces that are most meaningful to your world, as well as you sort of because of that meaning that you are interpreting into the stories that they are presented, you're also spreading out, making those stories more meaningful as you are going through. And, going back into creating meaningful stories, going into queer stories, which I think this hits on fantastic. Going into, to look at Kotaku just recently ran an article about the experience of one person who talked about their own sort of journey, and how taking the journey in this game sort of reference their own journey. Can you talk about a little bit like how you look to incorporate queer stories into this game, as well as maybe even like some of the other stories or what you've heard back from the audience when it comes to this?
Yeah, I mean, to start off with, I think, you know, when approaching the writing of each of the different characters that you meet in the game, and there's 16 different characters that you can meet on the journeys across the four journeys with repetitions. Some appear in all of the journeys, some appear in some, but each time you meet them, they have a different conversation. So there's like 50 different conversations total in the game that you can have with these other characters. And writing those, it's always for me a balance of the specific, the universal, and the surreal, which I think sort of in a lot of ways encapsulates Glitchhikers as a whole. There's these universal experiences that people have of these journeys and these conversations about life and death and the cosmos, but often framed in really specific moments that these characters have that are talking to you. They experienced this thing, they have these kinds of feelings, and using that as a way. I mean, I think that's true of all storytelling, right? Like, all storytelling is a specific, narrative or plot potentially that is trying to say something universal about the human condition. And so we do that sort of 50 times across all of these different characters. And some of them are, take much more general approaches, let's just talk about this concept writ large, and some are very personal. And that's, I think, especially where we wanted to bring in some of these queer storylines. You sort of alluded at the beginning to the fact that we'd released a version of Glitchhikers a long time ago, which we sort of rebranded as Glitchhikers First Drive. It had 6 conversations in it that you could have across multiple playthroughs. And so we had a lot more room to explore, and being able to look at some of those, the queer ideas, both in very, specific, like, this character is queer and here's their experience of moving through the world as a queer person, versus sort of the larger idea of like what makes a queer narrative. It's not just about the character is queer, it's about the way that we look at the world and the way that we challenge the, structures that we live in, and things like that. And all of that is to look at the world that we live in and the way that we move through it through various lenses, but also to tell specific stories that people might not, have been exposed to in different ways, right? Like you say, queer people coming to the game can see themselves in it and can see both in the specifics and the universal, but also non-queer people might come to the game and learn something. I was like trying to put in references to the AIDS quilt, and these like big community projects that not everyone knows about, and the fact that so much of our history as a community is lost because of, often very intentional destruction of our history, but also because of generations that have been lost before us, and wanting to, have some of that in there as well. But I'm sure Claris can also jump in and speak more to the queer content.
Yes, please do.
Absolutely. I mean, like, I think that those are great examples. And I think that, there are other characters that aren't necessarily queer that also talk about like lost histories and like dealing with like, how do you survive with the additional burden of carrying a culture of those who didn't survive. And that's one thing that we really wanted to do, to create this kind of lattice work of intersecting themes, so that, no matter how people come to it, there's stuff for them to bounce off of. And again, different playthroughs will have different responses. Like, we're not janking, every single player is going to have a different response to this game, full stop. We're thinking every single player is going to have a different response to this game, potentially every single time they play the game. And so, one of the things I really liked about that article is that the writer, Claire Jackson, speaks about how the game is an invitation for you to interrogate your own journey about whatever you want. And I really love that idea, because that's really something that we were going for, was this kind of open-ended invitation. And to Lucas's point, for non-queer audiences, we wanted this to be an invitation to ask potentially insensitive questions and stuff, and have people handle that with grace. Speaking of also handling things with grace, we wanted to make sure that the game would handle people putting a stop to any conversation with grace too. So we've put a lot of work into the game, and what I've kind of been calling content consent systems. And that's, your content warning, though we have more of like a message from the devs. And personally, like, I think that that's a more flexible approach, because really, like, genre, marketing, a bunch of other stuff goes into how you need to position your game with your audience, and how you need to talk about how this game might be different or unexpected to prepare your audience for that. In addition to kind of just saying, hey, this is a game about holding space for you. We're going to talk about stuff, but it's supposed to be in a hopeful and open-ended way. Giving content.
To jump in a little bit about that, at the very beginning, you can select certain things within the game. Like, there's like a warning. It's like, hey, we're going to be talking about all these like triggers that go into it. Are you okay talking about these things? Now, for a narrative like driven game, how do you, first of all, how do you like pick out like what are the different things in there that could be triggering, harmful things that people may not want to like have a conversation about? And then how do you still sort of like create that world where, if everyone just slaps down like a no across the board, how do you know if you're still giving everyone like that rich world that you want? Because there's a lot of like discussion nowadays where it's like, hey, if you don't like this, then you just don't play it, things like that, where it's like, okay, could how much is it the control of the person versus the control of the artist, things like that. So
happy to talk about that to some extent. I think that there is actually an interview coming out on Kotaku where I speak much more directly to a lot of those deeper
we will
questions.
say to check out Kotaku hopefully very soon to check all of that out. But as a preview to that article,
yes,
can you touch upon it?
Yeah, well, I think that it really depends on the kind of game and the genre. And as I said before, I think that kind of shifting that framing away from like a warning to the player and more towards a, hey, as the developers, we want you to understand why we made this game, who we saw as our target audience, but potentially why. And then also bringing our players' attention to some of our content filtering systems, which we saw as part of this larger kind of question of getting the audience's consent. Because for Glitchhikers specifically as a game, it's a game about open-ended questions, holding space for you to let your mind wander. And if you have pain or trauma in your life, or if you're struggling right now, letting your mind wander could be unleashing a stone that gathers a bunch of energy and intensity as it just knocks things down. And we can't design the experience such that we can, know exactly where you're at and intervene directly with your life experience. Because again, part of the magic of a game like Glitchhikers, and I think a lot of game narratives, is that point where the player's experience, the player's body meets the player character's experience in their body. And so, we wanted to draw players' attention to the menu systems where we can turn off some of these topics. We just have a handful of them, like body horror, grief and death, nihilism. I think there's a couple other ones. We wanted those to be less like a remove these if you don't want to deal with them, and also like allow people to turn everything but the one that they're particularly dealing with. So, hey, I've been really struggling with grief, and I actually want to increase the chance of talking about grief. But the promise of Glitchhikers is this is always going to be a mix of things. It's never just going to be like grief. So we're always going to have a bunch of other things, and the hikers themselves are always talking about a bunch of things. One of the things we wanted, even though this game is quite light, And there's a whole bunch of diverse voices. We didn't want any hiker to be like, hi, I'm the queer hiker. Here's all my rainbows. All I talk about is queerness. Like every hiker has got different things. They've got, journey they're on. They've got their own like sense of moral purpose. They've got their own interests and just random stuff. They'll talk about caves or whatever. In addition to talking about, their queer identity and stuff like that. So there's always going to be this mix. But the final piece of this puzzle for us was also allowing players, once they get into a conversation, because things wonder, full of tangents and open-ended things, there's always the opportunity to just press escape and to shut down the conversation, to not necessarily quit the mode, but just to say, hey, I can't handle this right now. Can you please leave? Or can we please stop this conversation? And every single one of our hiker, we wanted to have them model a little bit of good behavior because, hey, you don't always get the magical experience of telling somebody, hey, I'm having a really hard time right now. Can you respect my boundaries? And have that be a graceful conversation. Like respecting people's boundaries is hard. So this is a game about, whether you want to go in and deny everything and say, hey, I just want to lash out and say no, 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 or whether you just want to say yes, 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 take me on a weird wandering journey, or whether you want to start to scope and like sculpt the experience to tailor it to whatever you want to talk about. Like it's there for you, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think it's these games that help to start conversations. It's these games that help not just like outside of the game, but like maybe even inside of yourself as you're going into it, being like, oh, how do I feel about this? How do I go about even like recognizing uh, different aspects that you probably didn't even think about as you were going into it. Uh, and Lucas, obviously, like as I mentioned, like this is a it's not quite a follow up, but it is an extension of the previous game that came out a couple of years back. Like
2014, few years.
14 years. I'm older than dirt. Uh, but the question comes back: it's like, what brought you back to this game, or like what were the things that you saw here where it's like we have to go back. The journey hasn't ended.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean there were a couple big things. We the original Glitchhikers, like I said, came out in 2014, and it got a lot of response that I'm not sure we expected. It was very different from anything out there at the time. There was sort of this alt games movement happening in like the really indie scene, sort of art games that we were tapping into a little bit, but it was quite unique at the time, and some of the response was sort of blowback against that, but there was also a lot of folks who really dug what we were doing. And over the course of the last 8 years now, we still saw it cropping up. Every once in a while on Twitter, someone would say like top 5 games of all time, Glitchhikers, and you'd be like, wow, okay, like it's not a massive audience, but there are people who just really got it. And we saw that with some of the Let's Plays and stuff we'd see. Especially my favorites were always ones where people came into it being like, I have no idea what this game is about. It's driving, I'm going to do some driving stuff. And then by the end we're like, wow, that really taught me something about myself. So we knew that it had legs, right? We knew that, and it really made a difference to some people. And so I remember a few years ago we sort of got together as a team and said, is there more that we can do with this? And a big part of it that was always sort of in the back of our mind was we would always pitch the original game, which was just the drive mode. It was just a short drive, 3 conversations, a bit replayable, 20 minutes. And I would pitch it to people at GDC or whatever and say, okay, so that experience of driving late at night on a highway alone, listening to weird music with your mind wandering. And 80% of the people are like, wow, yeah, absolutely. And I'd say, that's what the game is about. And they'd be like, oh, cool, I'll check that out. And then other people would say like, no, I don't drive. And we're like, oh, okay, right. Well, yeah, okay, right, sure. Not everyone drives. And especially, when we're talking to an international audience at GDC or something, a lot of, folks in Europe and, non-North American countries where driving isn't so much the culture, oh, but okay, well, maybe like a late night train ride or something. And they go, yeah, I know, totally. Like an overnight train across the continent, sure. So we are like, okay, well, we should do like Glitchhikers train mode or something like that. And so that became sort of the springboard to say, there's more we can do with this, right? Just more types of conversations, but also more types of journeys that we can explore to make it that much more universal, right? Like we always wanted Glitchhikers to be sort of this universal thing. And so all of these options help broaden it towards that. And knowing that it meant so much to some people and thinking, if we can broaden that audience as well, bring it back. We've seen a lot of folks, like a lot of their biggest fans of the Spaces Between were folks that loved the original, and they have found us again, like you did, and came back and said, "Wow, I was never expecting more Glitchhikers, but I'm so glad there's more Glitchhikers." That's been really neat to see. So all of those things kind of made us say, like, yeah, there's something here that we can do, and we managed to get some support to do that, and it was just it's just been so great to revisit that world. Not that it's like, it's not like a narrative world like a Dragon Age or something, right? But it's a particular kind of space that we wanted to come back to and explore. And getting back into the headspace of writing Glitchhikers conversations was such a joy for me. Finding that place again.
Absolutely. To start to wrap things up, obviously we have a lot of people who are watching, a lot of people who are fans of the game, as well as people who want to create amazing games themselves. So do you happen to have any lessons learned or any sort of like insight to, like, if someone wants to get into more narrative work, or if someone wants to get into to be able to tell more queer stories, like what can we do? What can someone who is a developer learn from this, or what can you tell them?
Yeah. First of all, I meant to say this a little bit earlier, but like, happy Pride, everyone. Happy Pride Month. Yeah, I think that, making games is always a changing landscape. And like, huge caveat and grain of salt that like the lessons of yesteryear are never 100% applicable today, because it's again a shifting landscape. But one thing I can say as far as kind of narrative design and stuff like that is, like, I think there's a lot of advice about like, you just go make games, make tons of games, do game jam stuff. And that's great. And for what it's worth, like, that's how Lucas and I got our start making games too. But also like games criticism, like just on your own blog, just for yourself, like, can you explain in achingly precise detail why your favorite games devs are brilliant? Reverse engineer it. What were the conversations they must have had? Like how are these themes like overlapping and like brilliantly like brought to the fore by the kind of verbs and agency that the player has through the character and the game systems. And I think that from there, it's like, just putting your hat out there, letting people know like, hey, I'm happy to like work on games, happy to consult on games. I think also when it comes to making your own stuff, like, be fearless. If you are sure you need something in this game in order for it to be successful, consider what happens if you remove it. Like, one of the joys, and also one of the things that I think has gotten the most verbiage about Glitchhikers First Drive over the years is our like dogged insistence to remove just about every bit of interactivity we possibly could. Like, to some extent, like, as much as the game was about, liminal space and holding, like, space and kind of court with the player and their own, like, history and stuff like that, as much as it's also about a bunch of other things, it's a meditation about games themselves and what forms of interactions we deign to say are game-like and which ones aren't, right? So like, you can just make a small 30-minute thing that just throws a bunch of big ideas at the wall and then see how people write about it, see how people respond to it. Did people get what you're putting down? Is there something that you thought was kind of cool about it, but not really the main point that people seem to really have focused on. Like all that stuff can really teach you too. I'm sure Lucas has a bunch of great advice as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was certainly gonna go for the like just make stuff advice that you see a lot, but very explicitly, make queer stuff. Like tell your story or tell the stories that you want to see. One of the biggest one of the most impactful pieces of advice I received at some point in my youth was, tell the stories that you wish you had. And we're blessed to be seeing more queer content out there, certainly in mass media, but also in games specifically. But we still need more of it, and so much of what we see is trying to be, especially in sort of big AAA games, right? Trying to be somewhat generic and catch-all and mainstream to some extent, because they're having to deal with finding those audiences and whatnot, massive budgets. But we need to see more like of the personal stories and stuff. And I mean, I think the indie game scene has always done pretty well at that with various queer creators. But just because somebody else has made a queer game doesn't mean we're done now. We did it, y'all. We need to see so much more of that, and just continuing to push it and tell new stories and tell different stories, because we need to get beyond, and we are, but we need to get beyond the the traditional stereotypical stories. Okay, great, we got representation, but now can we please tell some interesting, messy stories, right? Like when we're just trying to get representation, everything needs to be as clean and wonderful and positive as possible, because we're so used to dealing with being fridged and being burying your gays and all of that kind of stuff, right? So we need to obviously avoid that, but we also need those other stories, right? We can have messy characters, we can have flawed characters, and that's not a bad thing. That's called good writing. And I think we need to see just more and more, and the personal and the all of that.
Perfect. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Make more queer games. I think that if we've learned anything for this month, if just make more queer games. I love it. I love it. Lucas, Clarice, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people follow you, find you, learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, silverstringmedia.com is our company's website. All of our team information is there. We are both on Twitter somewhat, but certainly glitchhikers.com is where you can find everything about Glitchhikers, the spaces between, including our something we didn't mention today, but we have a 71-track soundtrack with all of the info. It's available on Spotify and Apple Music and all of that too, and all that info is on our website as well.
Excellent. Any final words before we wrap this up? Any things that you would like to say to all the fans, or any things that you would like to say to people who are just now learning about this game?
Enjoy. Glitchhikers is yours. It is your space to explore and discover how you want to use it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we say right off the top in that message from the devs is there is no wrong way to play. And I think, when we see people's reactions to it, it generally tells us so much more about that person than the game itself, because it is so personal, and how you approach the game and the open mind that you bring to it. I think, you will get so much more out of it if you come into it with that. And like I say, to the folks who have been following us from the beginning and who have refound Glitchhikers, we love you all. It's been so great to see so many people sort of come back out of the woodwork and enjoy the game. So we have a Discord channel on the Fellow Traveler Discord where folks can chat about it as well, and we love seeing the stories there and all that kind of stuff.
Beautiful. So take up space, make more queer games. I love it.
Heck yeah.
Thank you both.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride, everyone.
Okay.
Cheers.
Bye.